G'day YouTube, warbles on a lot here. Behold, the first burn of the season, with all its attendant terms and conditions. Permit holder is required to do continuous monitoring. Permit shall be effective for following dates up to a maximum period of 21 days. From the 1st of the 8th, which was yesterday at midnight, to the 22nd of the 8th at 1 minute to midnight. Following firefighting equipment and resources must be available to conduct the burn. Water plus pump. Check, 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 check. But, mate, check, 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 mate. None of that here is actually much help. When what you're doing is trying to put a barrier between all of that and all of that. Because the whole idea is to try and push the boundary between what will burn and what has already burned as far away as you can from the area that's already been brush cut. There we go, using the tree as a shade for the lens to prevent flaring. It's kind of difficult to get out here on that side of the fireground with a hose to stop it. So as I said to the young fella at fire control, yeah, I have got water and I have got a pump and I have got hoses all to hand, but I'm not planning on laying out hoses and charging them with water and having a pump running while I'm doing a burn. I have got a water cannon with a hose, pressurised, laid out in case the fire gets away from me and heads towards my camp. But it's all basically going to be prepared, run, done and controlled by very careful and judicious application of just a little bit of fire at a time and keeping it all controllable. So that was the theory, you see. So here we are. I've done all this stuff on this high side of the driveway during burn notification time, where all you had to do was ring them up and say, I am going to burn, and you tell them that every 3 weeks and they would give you a tick of approval, and then you ring around all your neighbours. Well, even though we're still in winter, winter's got another month to go. It's now burn permit season, where you've got to have written authority, written permission to light a fire on your person the whole time you're running the fire. So last night I put in a 330 metre burn, starting from here, running down along there, and I had prepared buckets for a wet line, and I had built a stack of sticks, and the whole idea was anchoring off this already burnt area with a wet line down here, light in here, and if lit at precisely exactly the correct time, when this grass would be dry from the afternoon sun and before the dew got onto it, then this would have all burnt across here, rather than having had multiple repeated attempts to relight and restart the thing, because it just kept going out, because it got lit late. It got lit late because my mate, Skitty of the Kitty variety, suddenly decided, after I'd put the buckets down with the water in it, got all ready so that I could do the wet line in the very last gasp of daylight, he wanted to have a bit of a cuddle and sit on my lap and talk to me while I drank the coffee slowly instead of gulping it down. And that meant that when I come out here to do this wet line, it all went in by head torch light. which means that it's slower, which means that all of that, it got more dew on it than I wanted it to be getting. However, by the time I got down here, yeah, this was going off quite nicely. And by the time I was over here, where, as you can see, somebody's been along here with a cloud tool, and they've been scraping a hand line along here before the wet line. And somebody's also been around here preparing the trees so that I didn't know whether I was going to be able to hold it there or have to fall back to here, but I'd scraped a lot of the fuel away from there. And by the time I got down into here, there's a hell of a lot of brown fuel being raked up. Yeah, things were getting pretty willing. And of course this was all starting to advance up the hill, and we had a bit of an easterly breeze. And you know, the big trick is stopping this stuff over here from igniting in the radiant heat while this stuff goes off, and you sort of race the existing fire, trying to bring the fire up along this edge, steering it along here by lighting up out there and letting the heat from out there suck air in at ground level and suck this flame front across, while you got your trusty rusty leaf blower and blowing up all the way along here. And over here, this is my control line, and this is the wet line, and that there is where the fire staged the breakout. I had this controlled along that line, right? And sitting over here, about there perhaps, I had my leaf blower, more or less here-ish, perhaps as far as here. You know, as I recall it, it was 2 meters. Okay, so let's say the leaf blower was somewhere around here. In case I needed it, I left the leaf blower running. And I had the leaf blower pointing out there into the wind so that it didn't risk disturbing anything and blowing more fuel out onto the fireground, while I got the drip torch and went off and started lighting all these speculative hurry up, come and go again burns, while these rakings and earthworks and entrenchings were doing their job, and having the bark scraped off the trees was doing their job. All of my dry firefighting preparations, old-fashioned high-tech, were working well. And yeah, I was out here trying to make repeated reignitions do something other than just go out on the dewy short grass, which in itself is not bad, because what it does is it proves the effectiveness of brush cutting. The areas that I've had most trouble burning are the areas where I have brush cut. The areas where I have trouble containing the raging blazing fire are the areas where I have not brush cut. But anyway, I'm over here and I encountered my daughter, who'd come out to have a look at the fire and all the rest of it. And we got into a bit of conversation, and that kind of distracted me. And then she said, "Hey Dad, fire's getting a bit close to the leaf blower." I said, "Oh really? Should be all right over there." Play around here for a minute. "Hey Dad, that's getting close to your leaf blower." "You think so?" "Should be all right over there." "Dad, fire's just about burning your bloody leaf blower, you know, like flames are on it." Go up and over here, and she was exactly right. there was orange flames going into the air intake for the engine's cooling fan. It took me quite a while to figure it out, because at the time all I could think of to do was tick the bloody thing up and come back to here and squirt full throttle onto the little breakout, which was running down there. It had run past the wet line. This stuff here, this is the wet line. And it took me a while to work it out. But those of you who are into aerodynamics will have heard of Coanda effect, which dates back to 1910, when a fellow had his a fire in front of him on his aeroplane, and he noticed as he was barreling across the airfield 10 foot off the ground with the engine on fire, he noticed how interesting and curious it was that the flames were following the curve of his round cylindrical moulded plywood fuselage as they were blown back by the airflow. So Coanda effect describes how a moving airflow sticks to the surface that it moves past. So what we had here was all kinds of cinders and stuff on the ground out here, and there was a wet line. And on the other side of the wet line, sitting at ground level, there was a centrifugal fan with 2 metres between the centrifugal fan and the fire line, and the first half metre of that distance was wet line. It was actually wet leaves and wet grass and stuff. And while I've been off there dancing around with my Driptorch trying to light the wet grass, there's been sufficient draft going from the Fireground at, maybe only that far off the top of the ground, that it's managed to suck an ember from here past the wet line, and by the look of it, it might be about here. We'll let the shadow point it out. About there. That's where I think the fire has come across. It might be over there, but I'm pretty sure I had that out. But it's come through there. And by the time my distracted attention was redirected to the actual most important part, we had a leaf blower blowing air out there into that terrifyingly dry fuel, and it had probably 600 millilitres of two-stroke fuel in it, and it was simultaneously sucking air in from the other side. So it was just sitting here at idle, having created a low pressure zone, and the bloody thing pulled the fire towards itself. And if I had have had the leaf blower switched off, the prevailing wind from the dry fuel onto the Fireground would have prevented embers coming across, and because I had some high-tech fossil burning, make me more powerful, give me the wind advantage, and I didn't want to waste 10 seconds starting it in case I needed it in a hurry, I left the thing there, and yeah, it nearly blew itself up and blew itself all over my fuel pile. Admittedly, I've already burnt that there, I'd already burnt that over there, and this was upwind, so it would have been very embarrassing, and it would have been an absolute shit fight to try and get the fire out, because it would have wanted to keep going. I would have had to go and get the backpack and probably lay out hoses and do all sorts of shit. And it would have been unconscionable not to call the fire brigade to help, having officially in my own eyes lost the fire in the middle of the night. But that didn't happen, because my daughter spotted it. Admittedly, me talking to her was part of the distraction that caused the situation to occur, and me talking to the cat was part of the situation that caused it to occur. But you don't learn a lesson until you admit to it publicly. So here I am, I'm telling you, look out, be bloody careful where you put a leaf blower down on the ground thinking that you're doing the right thing, because if it's anywhere where it can suck a cinder towards itself, it's capable of pulling burning embers 2 metres upwind into dry grass, and just, you'd think the bastard of a thing wanted to have a Viking funeral. So that's mistake number one that I'd have to admit. The other one, that burn, the one I made the tutorial with a chest camera, extreme hazard reduction burning, I reckon I started that burn on the wrong side of it. I expected there to be an easterly breeze. I really should have started on the western side and worked my way around like I've done for all of the subsequent burns. I was guided more by slope than by anything else, and I wanted to anchor the finish of the burn on the brush cut perimeter of the clearing, because I figured the brush cut perimeter of the clearing is going to be easier to control the burn at the end. By the way, I've been burning sticks in that pile there, and by the colour of it I should probably go putting some water on it. It's not quite got a shimmering heat haze, but I'll lay a bit, I'll get steam out of that. But when I got to the end of that burn number 6, that's the one where I was initially planning to come all the way down here, and I didn't do it. I made my final ignition along here, and then I came up along here on the camera, and when I got up to here, the fire got a bit of a bloody spurt on, and I had to come across here and close the gap, keep the fire out of that rubbish filled hole in the ground. And as I was coming, I'd say, around here, I think it would have been along there, along that control line. As I was coming up here, there's about 3 places in that video where you can hear the leaf blowers start to choke, because it was getting so much pre-burnt air with so much carbon dioxide and so little oxygen it couldn't burn the petrol, and it was getting a rich cut. And I was feeling the same thing, which is why I run out the side. It's how you know you should move. If you're unable to breathe and if your equipment can't get enough air to run its motor, move sideways, get out of the stream of smoke. So that was a mistake. I should not have finished that burn here in this corner. I should have done what I've done in all subsequent burns, which is rely on local knowledge and my expectation that the sea breeze is going to come in. Start over here at the western edge, go down the slope, anchoring off the black zone, then go across, and as the fire accelerates, because it's no longer trying to burn directly against the wind to get into the fuel pile, and then finish the burn by coming back up the other side when the wind is only going to blow the fire into where you want to burn. And you don't have to buggerise around and do any of this shit, trying to argue with the fire to close off the end of the burn to stop it from getting out there. Admittedly, brush cut clearing is a better anchor than no anchor. And initiating a burn with no anchor point is so bloody scary that I reckon you're better off spending 2 or 3 days making an anchor point. Whoops, didn't realise I was videoing up, son. Hopefully that wasn't too bad. But anyway, yeah, so that's 2 mistakes that I've made so far in 14 burns in 2023. The other mistake, I caught it fairly early on. I'd used about 3/4 of a litre in the Driptorch, because this burn around here, a lot of it didn't want to burn too, and it was quite a Driptorch heavy burn. This would have been burn number 11. So I went to fill the Driptorch, and I had the idea that I only had about 1.5 litres in the plastic kerosene container, and I grabbed the plastic kerosene container which had the 1.5 litres. I was just a little bit on the interrupted side, but anyway, what I'd done was I had put 1.5 litres of bloody unleaded petrol into the drippiness of the torch rather than the kerosene, which it should have been, because Driptorch is not water pump. However, at least I caught it, because a 50-50 mixture of kerosene and petrol into Driptorch, that's nothing that I want to witness close up. But anyway, like I said, if you're going to make mistakes, you don't really take them on board until you confess them. So there's public confessions of 3 really close calls, actually. If I'd messed up and that fire had got past me, it would have been into the brush cut clearing, and perhaps get a big enough wind gust, would have been more exciting than I would want to see. The business with the leaf blower, that's just woohoo. Here it is. And can you see that there then? That's how much fire the bastard was eating. All right. Would I lie to you? That's quite the unique little leaf blower. But as you can see, what are you looking at? Distance from ground level to where it was sucking fire across the ground. 40 centimetres, 50 centimetres, 2 inches. And it was blowing air out of there. This side was facing the wind, and it was creating a low pressure zone behind it, and downstream of that low pressure zone, which was being evacuated by the engine's cooling fan, there was a wet line, and on the other side of the wet line there was a blacked out line, and in the thickest part of the fuel in the hump between the 2 wheel ruts, yeah, this side stopped the wind from blowing onto the Fireground, and this side sucked fire down into the grass and tried to give itself a Viking funeral. And there we have the plastic fuel container. It never ever would have occurred to me that that was a possibility, but squeaking as a low-speed aerodynamics consultant, retired, that is what I think happened last night, and that's how bloody close it got. So there you go. Now you know. Interesting, isn't it? Right. Ensuring that we have kerosene for the Driptorch. Come around here. And take that off, and we have a look, and we say we probably used 2.5 litres last night. We make sure that the little air adjustment feeder valve is open so that we can equalise the pressure, because this has a brass tube that runs down to the other end of it. And if you have the tube half full of air and you fill the Driptorch with new fuel and then you put the lid on and this is all closed up, next time you open this, the air pressure in the chamber will blow fuel up through that and it'll squirt Driptorch fuel out through the thing. Not a good idea. There is a sequence to this. Leave that one open the whole time, because there's no actual reason to ever have it closed, because otherwise, if they're both closed, as soon as you open this, it'll blow Driptorch fuel out there, and if you open this, it'll blow Driptorch fuel out there. So if you've got half a brain, you leave that open the whole time. This one, you open it up for filling. And here we have not got enough to actually fill the machine, and we don't want there to be any soot or shit getting in there, so therefore, yes, I filter the kerosene going into my Driptorch. So, it's now got all my ready-use kerosene. Of course, in the fuel dump there is a 20 litre container. I work out of this little 5-litre container. And oh yeah, actually, that's probably pretty close to being 4 1/4 litres in there, which I'm going to call that as being full. This goes over to the car. That can sit over there. And now, that's when you do up this little duva here, and then you trap that amount of air in there. So later on, when you go to undo the air control, you're not going to get kerosene fountaining up through there as if it was, you know, a bong that somebody choked on. Now, different people have different ideas on the matter, but I was taught that the way you tell a full drip torch from an empty one or a used one is that when you fill up the drip torch, you're supposed to clean the end of it, get the carbon off, so that next time you look at it, might be months down the track, you know whether you filled it up or not without looking. So that's so close to being full, I'm going to clean it. Which we do with a really old oily rag to get the easy stuff off. But up there at the top, that's not going to want to come off too easy. So we use a wire brush. There are people who say it's unnecessary, and up to a point they're right. However, part of the drill is using your wire brush to get the sticks and the leaf fragments out of these holes and to stop the carbon and soot build up, because that will interfere with the efficiency of your drip torch when it comes to having kerosene drip onto the wound fiberglass inside the flame holder. And that is how to tell the difference between an anally retentive firefighter and somebody who just doesn't give a shit what their equipment's like. So then the next trick is to refuel the leaf blower with 35:1 ratio 2-stroke mixture. So yes, we strain it and we measure it as it goes in, and we use 200 mils last night as it was frightening me and trying to kill itself at the end of the fire. But, you know, maybe it's something that I learned in flying, but when you set out to do something that's potentially dangerous, what we used to say to each other was, let's go and see what we can break. And I go firefighting, I say, let's see if I can do this without fucking up. Please create a God theory, help me not to fuck up. Well, I got a lot of help last night with that thing. Maybe I was only in the situation because I was busy being nice to a sick old pussy. But just look at that. Have you ever seen a little still leaf blower do a better job of breathing fire than that? Because I would never have believed it. If anybody had told me that that was something that was likely to happen, I would have said they were full of shit. But I don't think they are if they tell me that today. And hopefully you won't think I'm full of shit because you've got the evidence there. Right? It's not a picnic, this hazard reduction burning. If you're not right on your game, getting everything right, it's really easy to fuck it up. And when it starts to fuck up, you have to act fast and do exactly the right thing. And like today, I don't think there's going to be any burning off today. Look at that. 1st of September used to be Wattle Day when I was a kid. 1st of September. We are on the 2nd of August and the wattle trees are blooming. And the reason I showed them to you is because they're also wagging and waving in the breeze. So now I've got to split a bit of firewood and change the pod in the toilet because, you know, the eco loo is full, and then go to town and get bread for the kangaroo and the wallaby. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. My heart is on my sleeve, eh? Admitting how close I came to fucking up with that last night. Ciao.